Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On the afternoon of April 25, 1935, families gathered at the Coogee Aquarium in Sydney for what should have been an ordinary holiday outing. They came to look through glass, watch fish circle their tanks, and see the aquarium's newest attraction, a large tiger shark. No one in that crowd could have expected that before the visit was over, the shark would produce evidence from a suspected murder. The shark had been behaving strangely. It seemed distressed. Moving erratically inside the pool, then in front of several visitors, it began to convulse. Witnesses watched as the animal regurgitated a mixture of foul-smelling material. Among it was something unmistakably human, an arm severed above the elbow with the hand still attached. For a few stunned moments, an aquarium exhibition had become a crime scene. At first, the obvious explanation seemed almost too simple. A tiger shark had swallowed part of a person. So perhaps this was the remnant of a fatal shark attack. Sydney's coastal waters were familiar territory for sharks, and the animal had been caught in the ocean before being transferred to the aquarium. But when police and medical experts examined the limb, that explanation quickly began to fall apart. The arm had not been torn away by teeth. There were no ragged bite patterns showing that a shark had separated it from the body. Instead, the tissue and bone displayed signs of deliberate cutting. A sharp instrument had been used, and the severing appeared clean enough to suggest human involvement. The shark had not killed this person. Somehow it had swallowed evidence of what looked like a dismemberment, and the arm carried another clue, one that made identification possible. On the skin was a distinctive tattoo depicting two boxers. Even more importantly, the hand had survived well enough for fingerprints to be taken. Investigators compared those prints with police records and found a match. The arm belonged to James Smith, often known as Jim or Jimmy Smith, a former boxer and builder with connections to Sydney's criminal underworld. Smith had been missing for several weeks. He was in his mid-40s, married, and known to police through his associations and earlier activities. Those connections would soon shape almost every part of the investigation. This was not simply a case of identifying an unknown victim. Detectives now had to reconstruct Smith's final days, determine how his arm reached the ocean, and work out where the rest of him had gone. So let's back up a second. Before the arm appeared at Coogee, there had been no confirmed body and no public murder case. Smith had simply vanished. Missing adults can disappear for many reasons, especially when their work, relationships, or criminal associations make their movements difficult to trace. But once his fingerprints were identified, every conversation and sighting from the weeks before his disappearance suddenly carried much greater weight. Investigators learned that Smith had been involved with Patrick Brady, a man described in contemporary accounts as having experience in forgery and other criminal schemes. Brady was not a stranger who happened to cross Smith's path. The two men knew each other, and witnesses placed them together shortly before Smith disappeared. That made Brady important to the inquiry, though association alone was not proof that he had committed murder. Smith's last known movements led detectives south of central Sydney, toward Cronulla and Gunnamatta Bay. Witnesses reported seeing Smith and Brady drinking together at a local hotel. From there, attention shifted to a rented cottage nearby. Brady had access to the property, and investigators believed Smith had gone there with him. If that account was correct, the cottage may have been one of the final places where Smith was seen alive. Now here's where the case begins to feel less like a single mystery and more like a chain of partially connected events. Police searched the cottage and examined items they believed might be relevant. Reports from the investigation referred to suspicious staining and signs that something violent could have happened there. Yet forensic science in 1935 could not answer the questions modern testing might resolve today. Suspicion was easier to establish than certainty. Detectives also pursued accounts involving a heavy container or trunk. The theory was that Smith's body had been dismembered, placed inside, and moved away from the cottage. Testimony concerning transportation became a key part of the prosecution's developing narrative. But each step depended on witnesses remembering particular movements, identifying particular men, and connecting objects that were no longer available for examination. The supposed container containing Smith's remains was never recovered. One name kept emerging as investigators followed that trail: Reginald Holmes. Holmes was a businessman and boat owner with his own complicated links to Smith and Brady. Some accounts connected the men through fraud, insurance schemes, or other illegal dealings. Exactly how much each person knew remains difficult to establish because later statements conflicted and some evidence was never tested fully in court. Still, Holmes became central to the police theory. According to the developing account, Brady sought Holmes's help after Smith had been killed. A container holding the body was allegedly transported to Holmes, who then used a boat to dispose of it at sea. The arm, investigators believed, had somehow separated from the rest of the remains. It may then have been consumed by a smaller sea creature, which was itself swallowed by the tiger shark later displayed at Coogee. That explanation was possible, but it could not be demonstrated from beginning to end. No one recovered Smith's torso, head, or other limbs. No container was found on the seabed. The precise route taken by the arm through the marine environment could only be inferred. Even the shark's roll was accidental. It had preserved and returned one piece of evidence, but it could not reveal where that evidence had first entered the water. Holmes initially proved difficult for investigators to handle. At one point, police were alerted to alarming behavior involving him and a boat on Sydney Harbor. Contemporary reports described shots, pursuit, and what may have been an attempt by Holmes to harm himself. He survived that episode, however, and authorities continued questioning him. His actions suggested fear or desperation, but they did not explain whether he feared prosecution, retaliation, or something else entirely. Eventually, Holmes agreed to provide evidence. His account appeared capable of connecting Brady to Smith's disappearance and the alleged disposal of the body. For detectives, this was potentially the missing bridge between the cottage, the supposed container, and the sea. But Holmes was hardly an uncomplicated witness. He may have been protecting himself, shifting responsibility, or trying to negotiate his way out of serious trouble. His credibility would have faced intense scrutiny. Meanwhile, Patrick Brady was charged with Smith's murder. The prosecution's case was built almost entirely from circumstances. The men had been together, Smith disappeared, the severed arm proved violence, and witnesses described movements that seemed consistent with disposing of a body. Yet there was no complete corpse, no confirmed murder weapon, and no direct eyewitness to the killing. Holmes's promised testimony was therefore not merely useful, it may have been essential. Then, only hours before the coronial inquiry was due to examine the case, Reginald Holmes was found mortally wounded inside his car. He had been shot. The vehicle was located near Sydney Harbor. And Holmes died before he could give the expected evidence in open proceedings. The timing was extraordinary. A crucial witness in one suspected murder had now become the dead man at the center of another deeply disputed investigation. Was Holmes murdered to silence him? Did he take his own life and arrange the scene in a misleading way? Or did some confrontation occur that police never managed to reconstruct? Different theories appeared almost immediately. The physical circumstances did not produce a universally accepted answer, and Holmes's earlier behavior complicated the interpretation. His death removed the person who might have explained what happened after Smith entered the cottage near Gunnamatta Bay. This is one of the reasons the shark arm case has endured. Every apparent answer opens another question. If Brady killed Smith, what was the motive? Was it money, fear of exposure, a dispute within a criminal enterprise? Or something more personal? If Holmes assisted with the disposal, why did he later agree to speak? And if he intended to testify truthfully, who had the strongest reason to prevent him from doing so? The coronial process still had to confront the most basic question. Could officials legally conduct a murder inquiry when almost the entire body was missing? The only confirmed human remains were one arm. The defense challenged whether that was sufficient to establish Smith's death in the manner alleged. It sounds like a technical argument, but it went to the foundation of the case. A missing person is not automatically a murdered person. Of course, the condition of the arm strongly indicated deliberate violence. It had been cut away, not bitten off, and Smith had never returned home or contacted those who knew him. Common sense pointed toward death. But criminal law demands more than a persuasive story. The state had to prove both that Smith was murdered and that Brady was responsible, using evidence that was legally admissible and strong enough to support a conviction. The inquest heard testimony about the identification, Smith's last sightings, the cottage, and the alleged movement of his remains. But without Holmes alive, the prosecution lost the witness most capable of tying those pieces together. Statements Holmes had made outside court presented legal difficulties because the defense could no longer cross-examine him. What he had said might sound revealing, but the way evidence is obtained and tested matters enormously in a murder trial. Brady's case eventually reached the courts, but the prosecution's structure was fragile. It relied on inference layered over inference. Smith was with Brady, therefore he may have entered the cottage. Something suspicious may have happened there. Therefore Smith may have been killed there. A container may have been moved, therefore it may have held the missing body. Each step was possible. The problem was proving the entire chain beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge ultimately directed that Brady be acquitted because the available evidence was insufficient to sustain the murder charge. This was not a declaration that investigators had solved the case incorrectly, nor was it proof of Brady's innocence in a broader historical sense. It meant the prosecution had failed to meet the legal standard required for conviction. Suspicion, however strong, could not substitute for evidence a jury could properly rely upon. Brady walked free on the murder charge, and no one else was convicted of killing James Smith. The rest of Smith's body was never found. Without it, investigators could not determine the full pattern of injuries, a precise cause of death, or even exactly when he died. The arm established identity and strongly suggested dismemberment, but it could not tell police whether the cutting occurred before or after death, or what violence came first. Holmes's death also remains surrounded by uncertainty. Official conclusions and later retellings have not ended the debate over whether he was killed or died by suicide, and because the two cases were intertwined, uncertainty in one weakened understanding of the other. If Holmes was murdered, his death might indicate a wider effort to conceal Smith's killing. If he died by suicide, it might reflect guilt, fear, pressure, or circumstances unrelated to the police theory. Over time, the story accumulated dramatic details, and some retellings blurred documented evidence with rumor. That often happens in cases this strange. A shark, a tattooed arm, an alleged criminal network, and a dead witness already sound like elements from fiction. There is no need to embellish them. The reliable core is disturbing enough. Smith vanished, his severed arm surfaced inside a captive shark, and the legal case against the accused man collapsed. It is also worth remembering that the famous object at the center of the story belonged to a person. James Smith is often reduced to the tattoo on his forearm or the spectacle at the aquarium, but he had a family, a history, and a life beyond the way his remains were discovered. Whatever his associations may have been, someone deliberately separated his arm from his body, and no court ever established who did it. The setting makes the case especially unsettling. The evidence did not wash onto an isolated beach or surface during a police search. It appeared in a public aquarium in daylight before people who had arrived expecting entertainment. Chance placed the shark in captivity. Chance allowed the arm to remain identifiable. And chance caused it to be regurgitated where witnesses could preserve it. Without that sequence, Smith might have remained simply missing. But even that extraordinary accident was not enough to solve the crime. Police had fingerprints, a tattoo, witnesses, a suspected location, and a man they believed had helped dispose of the body. What they lacked was a complete, admissible chain connecting Patrick Brady to the act of murder. Holmes might have supplied part of it. But he died before his account could be challenged and evaluated where it mattered most, under oath in court. So the case ends with two deaths and no settled explanation. James Smith's body remains missing apart from the arm recovered in 1935. Reginald Holmes's final hours remain disputed. Patrick Brady was acquitted, and the unanswered questions outlived everyone involved. The shark delivered one astonishing piece of the truth, but only one. The rest stayed hidden somewhere between a cottage near Gunnamatta Bay, the waters off Sydney, and the silence of the people who knew more. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.